Louis Zamperini was a troubled kid from the start of his life. It was especially hard since he was an Italian immigrant, so many people were discriminatory against him. Louis grew up with many bullies that caused him to act out and get into fights. He was drinking and smoking ever since he was 5. As Louis got older, his behavior got worse and he began to steal and run away when he was around the age of 11. Louis' brother Pete was desperately trying to find a way to straighten Louis out, but nothing seemed to work until Pete convinced Louis to start running track. At first, Louis was an awful runner with little or no skill at all, but Pete made Louis work hard for his races and they trained nearly every day. Once Louis felt the intoxicated roar of the crowd cheering his name, he was hooked. While Louis still hated running, he still ran for the thrill of the crowd. He eventually broke the high school mile record, which held for 20 years after. Louis then went on to break the UCLA record, which held for 15 years. He had trained hard enough to make it into the Olympics. As he was on the boat to Berlin, he stuffed himself with so much food that he gained around 10 pounds. So had every other runner on the boat. When Louis ran, he was targeted by the other Olympic athletes and he could not move from his position. Eventually, he broke out and ran the last lap, the fastest anyone had seen. This shows his perseverance and hard work paying off. He even got the attention of Adolf Hitler, and Hitler was wanting to personally congratulate him. Once the war started, Louis enlisted in the United States Air Force, and he became a bombardier. Louis was sent on a mission which should have been routine. However, he and his crewmates were given the worst plane on the base, which caused them to crash and get stranded in the middle of the ocean. Sorry, I lost my spot. Louis had to become more of a leader than he had ever had to be. He had to help his fellow crewmates survive the ocean while he himself was stranded and starving. We see more of his perseverance and endurance through all of this. Louis eventually started to pray and seek help from God, and he promised that he would reign faithfully through his entire life if God helped him now. Louis lost 100 pounds while he was stranded, and once the crew was stranded for 2 weeks, Louis' friend and crewmate passed away, making this an even harder journey for him. Once Louis and Phil reached land, they were taken as prisoners of war, and they were beat and tortured by the Japanese for 47 days until they were separated and taken to 2 different war camps. Louis was under the torment of a violent man. Machiro Watanabe was his real name, but that was far too difficult for the prisoners to pronounce, so they just called him the Bird. The Bird was especially cruel to Louis because Louis showed signs that he was strong, and the Bird felt disrespected by Louis even though Louis had not done anything wrong. The Bird made Louis work harder than anyone. The Bird tortured Louis the most, but this showed how Louis was mentally strong and he was able to endure all of this. Louis continued to pray for God. Louis continued to pray to God for help, showing his faith. The Bird's torment lasted for 2 years, causing Louis great pain later in his life. Louis developed a drinking problem and drifted far away from his faith, causing his wife to want to leave him. But she found God and decided to stay with Louis while he was hurting. Eventually, she got him to go to church with her, and he rekindled his faith. Louis grew a lot throughout his life, and from the troubled kid who smoked, drank, and stole, to a man who was mentally strong, who endured a lot.